Hi there, and welcome once again to another edition of Peninsula Players Presents the History of Peninsula Players Theatre. Hello, Audie.
Hi, Greg.
Here we are again, and we're very excited because last interview we did 5 years.
We
Five.
five.
That was a big accomplishment. And what we thought we would do today is talk about some of the people in those 5 years that were important. And Audie, you kind of explain it as bricks upon the foundation of the theater.
Yeah, as I was kind of thinking about it, I know a couple people that we mentioned are part of that foundation, but then we also move into the next layer as we continue on and continue forward. So,
Mhm. Yes, because I think we talked about changing of the guard at this
mm,
last time.
right.
There are in this episode there are six people that we wanted to talk to, and we wanted to start with Maggie Magerstadt, who started at the Players in 1940.
1940 as a 17-year-old apprentice. So when she started, she was backstage. She was helping with the props, helping to dress the actors. She got to be an understudy for Gertrude Needham, and she was just excited at that possibility and felt honored to be chosen to do that. And she just remembers the excitement of being a part of the theater and then continuing and eventually becoming a board member. So she had almost an entire lifelong association with Peninsula Players and eventually purchasing a property right next door. So
Right, and she
it's
did, you said, at least 50 shows at the Players.
She did, and had ranging from comedic to dramatic, and always with a very unique personality and presence.
And she did have a unique personality and presence. She was a well-educated woman and a great conversationalist.
Oh, her vocabulary was amazing. I just loved talking to Maggie, and she was very inclusive. If she and always loved to have conversations and was like, come on, come here, come sit down, talk to me, and it didn't matter if you were a performer or the staff member or a carpenter, or she wanted to have those conversations, and with the patrons too.
Mhm. And she went to the University of Chicago.
And also her school friends had great memories of her as well. So her personality really was shining as a precocious youth
Mm.
as well as into adulthood. So it was, and her voice was always one of a specific quality that I remember
Mhm.
as well. So when I think of Maggie, I think of, it's a deep and husky kind of raspy voice, and her speech pattern was so unique. I just adored it. And it was just, just hung on words as she spoke. And
Well, a composer friend of hers, Ned Rorem, in his book, Knowing When to Stop, a memoir, he wrote specifically about her in that. He
he d-
described her.
he did. He wrote that she was an apple cheeked and blonde as an apricot, little brash, but in the way that wisecracks that she gave were really backed up by intelligence.
Mhm.
So and that she was very cultivated in
Mhm.
her language and was an actress with brains. So
And he adds, if that is not an oxymoron, which I would take umbrage with, but that's
but with Maggie, it was, and for those who knew her, that was that cultivation, that intelligence of conversation. It just and charming, and just brought this air of sophistication with her
Mhm. And you
wherever.
mentioned that she wasn't not only an actress apprentice at the Players, bought property almost next door to the Players, but she was married to one of the founders of the theater.
She was married to Richard Fisher for a while, and by the decade that we get into, which is now the 60s, by this time they have separated and they are divorced. and she'll move on with her life, but she has this connection to the Fisher family because a little more intensely than some other company members. And she also has and established a hobby for herself that becomes a little bit of a part-time career on the side. She's a trained bookbinder.
Hmm.
So Maggie has always had a fascination with literature and the written word, and not just speaking it and reading it, but she really cares about documents. And she is trained on how to preserve them. And she goes about 20 hours a week at this time and reassembles books. And it's a manual skilled trade to cut the paper, redo the binding, work with the glue, and all of that. So just that to preserve that was the passion
Yeah.
of hers.
And I read she was a member of the Guild of Bookworkers as a bookbinder for over 40
Mm,
years. And she had her own special collection, which she donated to the New York Public Library.
yep. So
And speaking of which, I read that she considered herself a Chicagoan, but and she partly grew up there, but
mhm.
she also had a place in New York as well as in Fish Creek.
She did. She was very, again, well traveled, and she'd spent during the time when you look at articles, she'd either spent time in Europe, sometimes over the winter, and in future years, she goes to visit Caroline and Rodion in Saudi Arabia.
Mm.
She traveled all over and met her friend for lunch in Paris, I believe. So when Ned mentions these things in his memoirs, he's meeting her in New York, he's traveling to Fish Creek to visit with her, they're all over. And Maggie has this dynamic life of working as an appreciation of the arts, not just as the bookbinder, but she also falls in love with this sculpture when she's at a New York gallery. And I read Grooms, it was a pop artist at the time, and really kind of one of the first pop artists who developed like happenings
Mhm.
and really works with color and acrylics and paper. Well, she saw this 25-foot by 25-foot sculpture of his called The City of Chicago. And she was reminded of her childhood in Chicago, being a 7-year-old looking at the gears of the bridge. And she says, that's what they looked like to me when I walked under there. And so she purchased the sculpture and donated it to the Chicago Art Institute
Mm.
during the 1960s. And they had a little reception for her at that time. But it's this very colorful
Yeah.
look at the city, and it's just amazing. And she had this fascination with art and performing. And so she also performed on radio. She performed little bits on television. And her not as other company members were like on craft TV shows and parts. She was your Miss Average Housewife during sponsorship breaks.
Ah,
So there were performer, the late little average housewife who is comparing brand X to this other brand. And that was Maggie for many years on television. That's what she did. And
and speaking of, the arts, she was also interested in music. One of the people she grew up with, Ned Rorem, was a prolific composer, and actually, I knew her pretty well.
knew her very, very well. And at her memorial when she passed away, there was a song that he had composed specifically for her in her honor and based off of a Walt Whitman poem. Um,
Of you whom I often and silently
come,
come.
yes, and I thought that was the best tribute was in song and
Mhm.
music. So
And she and her second husband, Joe Rosner, are both buried in Blossemburg Cemetery.
they just both adored Fish Creek and Door County so much that they're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, she was an extraordinary woman, and I was. She knew of my interest in Shakespeare,
Yeah.
and she actually gave me her complete works of Shakespeare, which is
Oh,
we have at the theater right now.
amazing.
So, in another person who we wanted to talk about was William Munchau.
Right. And it's kind of nice to have Bill and Maggie right next to each other because Maggie was Bill's straight woman. So there's always a straight man in a comedy duo. And a lot of people will recall from the reviews that Bill created the Mona Lisa sketch, and Maggie oftentimes was the straight woman out front who was the patron of the museum that had to stay and not crack while Bill was in his frame as Mona Lisa, just making faces.
It looked like he was very expressive.
Right, right. Oh, and one little thing with the reviews that I'm sorry I forgot to mention. Maggie, as I said, had this nice, lovely voice. One of her renditions that she would do in these reviews, in addition to the Mona Lisa sketch, was to do Tiptoe Through the Tulips her way. And I really wish I would have heard her sing that.
It would have been very different from Tiny Tim's
Yes,
version.
exactly. But yeah, but back to Bill.
Bill, yeah, I mean, he did quite a lot of shows at the
He
Players.
did. He started in 1949, right out of Lawrence University in Appleton, and earned his equity card and had more than 100 roles alone on Peninsula Players stage
Mhm.
before 1960, or within that time frame, 1960, I believe, within that year is when he received that honor. He continued to work as an equity and professional actor in Chicago. He several times, I think, was a very featured actor at the Candlelight
Mhm.
and other theaters, and was even nominated for several Jeff Awards during his time in Chicago. So
Yes, as nominated for as principal actor in a play in the play Child's Play, and nominated as an actor in a supporting role for the first production at the Candlelight Forum Theater, The National Health.
mhm.
Two nominations in a year.
Right. It's just exciting. And it was nice to see that when we eventually get to the 50th is when Maggie and Bill will eventually return um, to celebrate that anniversary year. So
And that was when he did Harvey, came back to do
yes.
Harvey. Yes.
Yeah.
And yes, he worked a long time and did a lot of stuff. I wish he was someone indeed I really wish I could have known and at least seen his work.
Hmm.
Um, we believe, right, that he's
Yes,
still around.
we do. And we have uh, several carpenters who have experienced night visits by someone they believe to be Bill. And mostly it's for their safety. So a young man named Bob Spider was sleeping one evening, and all of this guy is like yelling at him in his sleep, and he's like, "You gotta wake up! You gotta wake up!" and using a few more explicitives um, to get him up. And when he woke up, his windows were open and all of his stuff was getting wet because it was rainy and stormy. So he shut them, and he we were talking about it. He stopped by the office, and it happened to be when I was working on the 65th anniversary booklet, and I happened to have Bill's picture of from Harvey on my desk. And Spider's eyes got really big, and he looked down at it and he goes, "Audie, that's who was in my dream last night." And
And that's only one
one
of
of them.
several stories about his appearance there. So I think we're happy he's hanging around.
Yes,
Though he sounds a
exactly.
little grumpy.
I think he's just looking after everybody.
Yes, good. And another longtime friend and of the Players is Jeanette Leahy, who started working in 1960 there.
Yes, an amazing 30 years with Peninsula Players. And I was so happy to get to know her my first season. And just to, when I always looked at her career, I always found it very fascinating because she just seemed to, being a mass communications major as well. So I studied radio, I studied television and film and theater, and she did it all. She started in 1950. She was one of the first women on Indiana television to host her own programming. So she started in radio first, writing scripts in South Bend, Indiana, and hosted children's shows, and then moved to Indianapolis and was on air. She had her own TV program, Hoosier Housewives. She interviewed career women. She did all of these personal appearances under the name Jeanette Leahy, and was considered the first woman on Indiana television
Hmm.
hosting all of these programs. And in the evenings, she'd be involved with community theater. She really kind of got bit by a theater bug and ended up becoming, in Indianapolis, was the Starlight Musicals, a theater company there, and she became their leading lady for a
Hmm.
while. And so it was just amazing, to be on top of all of that and then do commercials within those programs as well that she was doing. So she was like improving her way through product sponsorships and interviewing other career women all the way to Cub Scouts and Brownies, and just a personality. And eventually she moves to Wilmette, Illinois, and becomes involved in commercials. She's performing before commercials and eventually gets cast in some shows. And she starts working at the Drury Lane and all of these other venues. And in 1960, she gets cast at the Seesaw at Peninsula Players, and then returns in 61 as their leading lady. And she's with us for the next 3 decades.
Yes,
And
I even had a chance to act and direct her. And when I got there, and she had an interesting background as a child.
she did. Yes, she's a Wisconsin native by birth. She was born in Eau Claire, and her parents met during World War II. And her mother was a Red Cross nurse in France. And then I believe after she was born, they moved back to France. And you recall her telling you a little bit about her growing up.
Yes, she told me that she at least grew up partly in Réunion, an island off the east coast of Africa, which surprised me. But that's
But that,
what's part of
yeah. And then as a young lady, when World War II broke out, she signed up and became a WAC as well. So she served her country. She built this career and just really honored. It was just, to me, it's amazing for to be that independent at that time. And so it
Yes.
was really to know Maggie and Jeanette, get introduced to them. I was just like,
Yes, and
um,
she was a very gracious and warm
she
lady.
was. She was very artistic in her nature as well, and interested in painting and craftsmanship. And she worked with a lot of celebrities.
Hmm.
So, as Peninsula Players is not a star venue, a lot of the character actors that work with us when they're in their regular seasons, that's what they do. They worked at other star venues to help support those performances. So Jeanette got to work with all of these people across the spectrum, from Gloria Swanson to Forrest Tucker and um, Charlotte Ray, who I couldn't believe I tore her ticket. So Charlotte Ray and I was like, okay, so Charlotte Ray came to see Jeanette in one of the shows, one of my first seasons, and I'm just rushing, okay, got to get these people in, tearing their tickets and tearing their tickets, and thank you for coming. Here's your playbill. And then all of a sudden, I realized after the show started, I'm like, wait a minute, I think that was Charlotte Ray. So she had come to see Jeanette, and I'm like, okay, I'll chuck that one off.
Oh, yes, yeah. And I remember Jeanette also built a house just on Green Bay, just again south of the theater. And I remember visiting there, and her hallway was absolutely jammed with pictures of stars and
Mm-hmm.
shows she was in. Oh my goodness, she did a lot.
She did, and especially the span of time she was on national tours, as well, and just was received a lot of great reviews for her performances as well. So it was just an amazing person to know.
And she was involved with the Wilmette Children's Theater.
She was their director for almost a decade, from 1960 to 1968.
It's wonderful talking about these people who had such varied interests,
Hmm.
wide interests.
Very wide.
Um, and then another three people that we want to talk about. They all three started in 1961. The
Hmm.
first one being Doug Allman.
Right. Yes, Doug. And in connection, at that time, Doug became interested in theater. I think later in life, and I was working with David Crane, who happened to be came and directed for Peninsula Players at one point.
Hmm.
So while Doug was with us, he was in about 17 shows. He was in Under the Yum Yum Tree and quite a few other productions, all the way up to that championship season in 1974.
Hmm.
And he also brought his family with him. And his daughter Randy got to make her debut at Peninsula Players in The Impossible Years, in the same show that her dad was in. So that was kind of exciting to see them playing together as well.
And I
And
think he said that was one of his favorite roles.
yeah, it was, along with Mr. Doolittle in My Fair Lady. And there was a chance when he got to play a hippie in What Did We Do Wrong? So it was like a middle-aged man who said, you know what, I'm going to join the other culture. Drove
And
his
on
kids
the
a little crazy.
other spectrum of things, he said one of his favorite roles was the common man in A Man for All Seasons. Totally
Right.
different thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting you mentioned David Crane, but apparently Doug had been doing community theater, and David Crane encouraged him to become a professional.
He did. David thought he could do it, that he could make it, that he could have this profession. And he did. Doug continued to perform in the Chicago area. And he had, I know, Hinsdale Summer Theater, we've mentioned before, as a venue that was a summer stock he worked at. He
Mhm.
performed at this one company called O'Hare Inn Theater.
Mm.
And then the one company he really seemed to work with the most was Ivanhoe Theater.
Mhm.
And he had done a couple productions there with some stars, including working with Bob Thompson in Bus Stop and The Biggest Thief with John McGiver, which he's a character actor on television who has a ton of television roles. But he also got to work with him in another production right before his passing in 75. And then with the Ivanhoe, he also got to work with Status Quo.
Status Quo Vadis.
Thank you.
Yeah.
and and that production ran for about 7 months, and then Ivanhoe moved it to Washington D.C. at the Arena Theater,
Mm.
and they continued to perform it there. And that, for a name, featured a very young Bruce Boxleitner
Mm.
within that production as well. So
And it was, sorry to say, he was only 53 when he passed away, which way too early.
yes.
But I always thought it was interesting when you told me that when he was doing community theater before he got into theater, he had all these other jobs but he did totally unrelated.
Right. He had worked in a variety of things, and from salesman, high school instructor, to a drama coach, and then he got to portray all of them too, like a construction worker and a truck driver, and he got to do craft television, TV shows. So he was just, kind of like your everyday man, and being that everyday character actor of filling those trade
And it's
spots.
cool that then he did the Odd Couple.
Yes, and then so he and Ralph Foodie were cast as Felix and Oscar, and Doug was Felix. So he was the nitpicky one, the nitpicky character, and Ralph Flutie, who's a little more lean, was Oscar, the grouchy one. So, and we get to talk to Ralph, and these two lovely gentlemen. The Odd Couple was sold out prior to the opening. So they performed at a completely sold out performance. Ralph started with the Players in 1961, and he returned in 1962 to help originate the role of John O'Rourke in the Armored Dove, which was the world premiere that the company did. And he was in a variety of other shows with the theater. And he was another person who didn't come to theater right away. He actually has a degree in journalism from Marquette and grew up in Chicago and was a very avid White Sox fan. And
Important
after,
to know.
yep, good. That's a point to know, because as we go through, there's a Cubby fan that's gonna come up down the road. So, Ralph was a radio announcer when he first graduated and an editor of a magazine. And from being a radio announcer kind of got him interested into theater. And from there, then he went to the Goodman School and trained and got involved with a Shakespeare company out east. And so he had been performing King Lear, Falstaff, as well as touring in musicals. A funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. He'd been in My Fair Lady, and he was really Chicago based and got to be involved with all of these productions as well. And some of the companies that Ralph had worked with, again, were also a few little star venues. So he got to work at In the Round Dinner Theater, the Little Theater on the Square in Sullivan, where he was in No Time for Sergeants with Peter Marshall, the host of Hollywood Squares.
Right.
So it made all these memories of retro television go through my brain when I heard that. And Pheasant Run Playhouse, Drury Lane, he was in the opening production of the venue in 1965 at Drury Lane, The Happiest Years with Walter Pidgeon, and worked with actors like Robert Wagner and Phyllis Diller and John Carradine and Rose Marie. And he toured in
Everyone Loves Opal.
Thank you. Everyone Loves Opal with Martha Ray, and then performed that show again with Rose Marie. So it was.
So he was a busy guy.
And he was. He was.
And also, Audie, Ralph Foodie was involved with some iconic movies.
He was. One of the last film roles that he had was in Home Alone and Home Alone 2. So within these movies, it's the story about this young boy named Kevin who gets left home alone or alone in a hotel room at the holiday times. And he uses vintage films. He's been watching old gangster movies, and he uses the audio from that to scare away some crooks that are trying to break into the house or the hotel staff that's trying to communicate with him. And he uses the dialogue. Well, Ralph Foodie is the gangster in those movies. And his catchphrase is, "Merry Christmas, you filthy animal." And Greg, there is merchandise that you can get this on. This catchphrase is sold on ornaments, sweatshirts, t-shirts, coffee mugs. It's amazing. So if anyone that is Ralph Foodie.
Okay.
Ralph was also got to be involved in another Chicago film that honors Chicago, is the Blues Brothers. So with all of these great musical talents of Cab Calloway and Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin, there's a little shot of Ralph being the police dispatcher who sends out all of the police to apprehend the Blues Brothers who are just causing mischief all over.
It's wonderful to talk about these people who have gone on and done some really fun stuff. And last but not least, we wanted to talk about Mary Gage.
We did. And Mary was also, she's started in 1961, but she's very fascinating. And learning about Mary, I really felt like her and Caroline would have been soul sisters. Mary was started interested in theater as a child because her parents encouraged her to participate to help relieve a speech stammer that she had. And she became fascinated with it. So all throughout college as well, she attended the University of Oshkosh and participated in all of their activities. And Mary Gage then, she married in 1934 and moved to Green Bay with her husband, Bidwell Gage, who was working for one of the paper plants in the community. And Mary continued to be involved with community theater. And she, from 1934 through up until 1981, was involved with the Green Bay Community Theater. She played 25 different roles with the community theater through 61. And then
Mhm.
she sort of retired from the stage, but just for a little bit because then Peninsula Players got her.
Mhm.
So, and and she continued to perform. The Invitation to March in 1961 was her first production, and she continued to perform with the Players for another decade or more in a variety of roles. And she always remembers it was she felt honored to be chosen as part of the company and to be cast. And then she returned to the community theater where she was very active. She was on the board. She was president of there, and she directed then shows for another 20 years
Mm.
with the Green Bay Theater. And it was very um, very supportive of the arts, and she followed kind of in Jeanette's footsteps a little bit because she had her own television show and she was interested in other things. After she stopped directing, she took people on group tours to outside of the country, and
Mm.
so I could really see all of this connecting. The one story that people like to share about Mary is in 1946 when she and some other people concocted this PR stunt for personal appearances
Mhm.
in Green Bay. And she had dressed up as the character, Carol Arden, and the star of the play that she was going to be in. And she was wearing a fuchsia gown, a just really outlandish outfit, a blonde wig,
She was
and
very glamorous
it
looking.
was, yeah, she's very, very glamorous. And they had set up that there'd be some teenagers in all of these different stores. They were the Bobby Sockers.
Uh,
And so Mary would walk in dressed as Carol Arden into these stores, and the teenagers would run up to her. Oh, can we have your autograph? Oh, please. Oh, you're just so famous. And these other people around her just went with it. And oh, okay. And yeah, let's get your autograph. And she was signing things. And next thing you know, there's traffic jams and chaos in the streets, and the police are called, and they pull up with a limousine and take Mary off to safety. But it was,
so she started a riot.
he started a riot in downtown Green Bay.
And she was also honored with an award, a Silver Goblet Award in 1975. And speak about that. And
It was, I was really, it wasn't the, I was moved reading that the community theater honored her with this silver goblet, but more so that she was a perfectionist and, willing, how much she was willing to give for a production and to give to the community. And it, to treasure those people,
mhm,
that people like this and with the theater and with the arts helps to build a community that makes your community special. And Mary was doing that for Green Bay. There are people in Door County that help do that for Fish Creek, for Egg Harbor, for Sturgeon Bay. And those people need to be help make the community. They help make the community feel that you're connected to each other and it's not just a place that you sign your utility check
yes.
to.
Mm.
And that is what also helps you, all of the other artists and community people in Fish Creek feel connected. And that's what we've missed
Yes.
during this time.
Oh, indeed, indeed. And I really do love talking about all these people who have passed through our doors.
Yeah.
And we talked about these people today, and will because they were people who really spent a great deal of time with the players and influenced this whole period of time
Mhm.
when we were continuing to build upon the foundation. And I just I just love that we are part of that history.
Yes.
Yes. So next time we will continue with some more people that
Hmm.
have been important to the players. And also, we hope maybe names and faces that you recognize from your time at the theater. So Audie, thank you once again for keeping all of that stuff up there.
I try.
You do, you do. I think you have a better brain than me. Anyway, so take care. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
And we will see you next time.